And welcome to HBYOB Brewcast, where we talk about beer, talk about drinking beer, talk about making beer. Tonight, I don't have a problem with beer. I have a problem without it. Your questions, frequently asked ones, in the store, on the website, and troubleshooting. So stay tuned. And welcome. I'm your host, Easy Kill from A Fantasy Fan. And I'm joined by a couple of other brewers in the house. Co-host, Chris Allen. How you doing tonight, Chris?
Doing great, Mark. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. We're going to be drinking some beer here. I got a new one. I didn't get to do the show with you guys last week, so I have one that's been sitting in my refrigerator for 2 weeks because I bought it to drink on the show and didn't want to spoil that. Where can people get a hold of you?
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX.
Right, and I'm Easy Kill at A Fantasy Fan on Twitter. Our co-host with me and Chris, and our sponsor and owner of HBYOB, Joey Brumley. How you doing?
Good. How are you?
I'm doing fine. And are you ready to answer questions? I have a list of questions.
Fire away.
Let's do this.
No, I'm not going to fire away yet. I opened my beer first this time. Chris probably already drank half his.
See, look at you.
I just banged my mic. I'm just drinking from Mad Tree Brewing Company, Happy Amber Red Ale.
That's a good one.
I'm a red ale guy anyway, but I've never had it. Oh, this is definitely it's an orange, kind of like a little bit of an orange crush color work in there.
Looks beautiful.
It is. Oh,
no foam.
Yeah, no foam. I don't have a problem with foam. I'm a foam guy. I'm a head guy. Chris, what are you bringing? What are you bringing tonight? What have you already drank 8 ounces of already?
I haven't had anything to drink, and I have to share this with you guys because we're getting into the race season. There's a race coming up this weekend actually that I'll be doing with the Brumleys, and then there's a beer walk or like a beer run or whatever at the beginning of June that I'm also going to be doing. So telling you guys is right now, I'm not having any beer until the day of that race in June. So I have sworn off beer for the next month while I try and at least get myself into some sort of shape so I can run these races.
So your ass is out of shape because of beer?
It contributes.
Baloney. Wait a minute. I'm going to add that question down here. How many calories does a home brew have? But
it sure shit doesn't help.
Because I've lost weight before and I've not had to take beer out of my diet. So
you just become a cheap drunk when you do that.
Exactly.
I got you. I mean, I understand.
I'm just drinking this instead.
What are you drinking?
Well, I did want to show you guys this first though, because this is the milkshake IPA that I brewed I think about 3 weeks ago. It has mango, strawberries, and apple juice in here, so it's infused with those 3 fruits, along with a various assortment of hops. I've got some Mosaic, I've got some Simcoe, I've got some Azaka in there. So for like a little fruity aroma, and also obviously the fruity taste with the fruit that's been added to it. So this is the beer that I'm actually entering into the homebrew competition that's going down at Rheingeist next weekend. So looking forward to that. And then okay. I'm just drinking some
next weekend, meaning it'll happen before our next show.
No, the 19th.
Okay, so we'll have another show next. So next show, you can have some details where people can come taste your beer if they want. Is this one of those where do you serve other people or only have to have something for the judge?
Only something for the judge. It's just 2 12-ounce bottles that you take down. Joey, I got to pick some up from Joey this weekend so I can take it all down to Cincinnati with me and drop it off for the judges.
Okay, so people can't sample those, but all right. So just
I don't think it's like that this time around.
Okay.
Unless everyone gets like a half of an ounce, I don't think that'd be possible.
It's
If you're
not going to work. All right.
Well, this is like 7.7%, so you might get wasted off of it.
yeah.
Now, are you drinking that now? Have you had that before, or are you just?
I
pouring
just
that to
have it
let
in a
us look
small.
at?
Yeah, I just brought it up for you guys to look at. I mean, it smells great. I tasted it the other day. Just a quick sample. It's still a little bit bitter because I did have some dry hops in there, so I'm just kind of letting everything settle out for a little bit. Hopefully, it mellows out. But I'm pretty happy with it.
All right. Joey, what are you bringing this evening, or what are you drinking? A homemade brew or something that you've purchased?
So I slacked on the store bought and looked in my refrigerator, and all I got's one bottle left of KBS. So all I'm rolling with tonight is homebrew. So I brought a lager that I did. It's in a Yingling glass because it's supposed to be kind of like Yingling, and I also brought a IPA, similar color. An IPA that I brewed up, not the one I'm entering into the competition, I don't think, Chris. That's why we'll have to figure it out. But yeah, I figured I'd go mild to wild tonight.
Now, is either one of those one of the homebrews that you've given me recently? The one you just gave me was a citrusy one.
So the one I gave you that you had for lunch is I'm kind of killing it already. That's the problem with lagers. I can make them disappear fast. That was the one I gave you. You said you liked it, and this other one, you'll have
the lager was very good.
Saturday you'll have that one.
Saturday I'll have that. All right,
It'll be all nice.
I'm going to see it tomorrow night. I mean, just saying.
Tomorrow night.
Yeah.
Tomorrow.
We have a game tomorrow night.
I lost track of my days. A couple.
Right. I mean,
I got back from Hawaii, and I still don't know what day.
That's our personal life. We don't want to get involved in our personal life.
Nice job, coaches.
Yeah. Woo! One of us is undefeated, and the other one, on his own is not. But
I'm 2-1.
No.
Or 1-2.
I'm 2-0, and you're 0-1. But that's okay. We won't.
No,
who's keeping track?
Yeah. It's
this isn't bad. Have you both had this Happy Amber?
I'm not an amber fan, but out of ambers, that's probably one of my more favorites.
And what makes it an amber? If I was a home brewer, what makes an amber an amber?
The color.
Mm-hmm. That's it. Okay, idiot. What? But is it the grain? Is it the hop? Jesus.
I mean, this is a frequently asked questions podcast. I got to be specific.
All right. What specific ingredient makes the color amber in this amber?
So some caramel malts will definitely do it. Ambers are typically, in the 4 or 5% range, mildly hopped, meaning you shouldn't get much, if any, hop presence to them whatsoever.
Multi-backbone.
Very multi-backbone. Fat Tire is probably the most popular amber that's on the market. I don't like it at all, but it's probably the most widely known amber that's on the market.
All right. I mean, and this is brewed here in Cincinnati. Then you
got Yingling. It's an amber lager, but not what you have. So
right. I like Killian's. I know that's not like a homebrew brew,
but it's Irish red, isn't it?
That's a red.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But this says this is somewhere on here. I read something. It is a red, but
it's amazing because just the other day I was talking about with a customer saisons, and he was talking about saison, and what do I need to do for it to be a saison? And I said, you really kind of have a pretty big spectrum with saisons. Ambers aren't quite, a lot of types of beers kind of start to blend together. Like I always think porters and stouts at some point kind of become the same beers. Reds and ambers kind of mesh into the same beers. Pale ales and IPAs, sometimes the terminology, they kind of blend in together. At some point, beers transform into the other. There's not a distinct line that's drawn in the sand.
This is saying an amber ale. Can you have an amber lager? I mean,
yeah, sure. That's what Yingling, I believe, by definition is. Technically speaking, there's only 2 styles of beers, lagers and ales. So Yingling would be kind of like the amber ale, except using lager yeast. I'm not an expert with that, but that would be kind of the nuts and bolts of where I would.
Well, for tonight's show, we do have multiple questions, and me being the amateur here, I'll just throw that one out though right off the top. Just basically the difference in the two is the difference in an ale versus a lager? Is it the type yeast or how the yeast is pitched? Isn't one fermented on the top versus one on the bottom, or am I just making that up?
Yep. You want to answer that, Chris?
Yeah, so between the two, between an ale and a lager, if I'm remembering correctly, with lager, you are much more, I believe the process in terms of the temperature, it's very much, sensitive to that for lager yeast. So I forget what the entire steps are, but it's much colder than you would for an ale. So in like I would say like low 50s, Joey, if I'm not mistaken, that you can start a primary fermentation with a lager yeast, versus with an ale, you're looking in like the 60s, low 70s, like somewhere in there. It's a much wider range. With lagers, I mean, it is very much like, set steps, specified steps that you have to use in order to do like a true lager. And it's fairly complex from the last time I took a look at doing it. And you need, I wouldn't say special equipment, but you do need some temperature control, like a temperature controlled environment in order to match it.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Control environment, which I never had. I always technically did an ale.
Which was funny to me because like the Mr. Beer kits, they'll call them lagers, but they're giving you ale yeast. Right. They're generalizing the term of light style beer. So we see the name lager and we go, oh, that's a light style beer. That's really not necessarily the case. There are IPLs, which would be India Pale Lagers, very hoppy beers, but fermented with lager yeasts.
Now,
then you even have. Go ahead.
So it is the yeast itself. There is an ale yeast and a lager yeast. It isn't just, you can't use one yeast and make one an ale and one a lager and compare the taste at their flavors at that point.
So there are ale yeast are top fermenting, lager yeast are bottom fermenting. Typically ale yeast are, like Chris had said, 60 to 80 degrees, roughly speaking, versus lager yeast are in the 50s. This beer that I was drinking, I did ferment it at like 53 degrees. I did do what's referred to as a diastole rest, meaning after primary fermentation was done, I brought it up to ale temperatures just to get the last couple gravity points. I'd used a temperature controlled setting for this beer. It took a long time, but the term lager, I believe, roughly translates to long and cold. Don't quote me on that. So that's why a lot of the old breweries were built in caves so they could control the temperature. A lot of people confuse, I don't want to use the word confuse, but associate lagers with very, very light, crisp beers. They're not going to produce near the esters as ales. Then you run into California Commons or steam. I don't want to say, only a few people understand what I mean. Oh, don't say it. But steam beer is basically where they're using a lager yeast, but fermenting at close to ale temperatures. So it's tough for ales to survive at lager temperatures, and even lagers need a very good healthy count to ferment in the 50 degree range. But it's fun to do. Like I said, this beer I used, flake corn and some things like that. I was really kind of going for a macro beer style. And like I said, you liked it, Mark. So it is
very good.
The problem is it's an easy drinker. It is a very easy drinker.
Now, as far as someone coming in new to brewing, would most of the time, I would assume most people will start out as an ale.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you'd brew an ale early on. Because like I said, lager is cold and long. Is that what?
Yeah, that's a general format.
So lagers. Mrs. Easy's a lager. Got it.
I don't recommend people starting off with lagers simply because especially since most lagers are very light in flavor, I hate to say it, but like an IPA or an amber, they can mask some imperfections in the beer. They really can. Versus when you're brewing a very, very lightly hopped, very low maltiness beer, I mean, you do anything wrong, it's going to shine right through a very light style beer like that.
All right. The next question I have, a person said they only drink Corona, and they want to know, can they brew that exact beer?
That's actually kind of what we were just talking about. The answer to that, I would say, is no. If you are a diehard Corona person, keep buying Corona. You can brew something similar. Don't get me wrong. It's going to take some specialized equipment, but I do recommend new brewers brewing ales, just because they are easier, they're quicker. It'll get you into the hobby faster. But if you've got a beer where you say, I got to brew this beer, dead on, then just keep buying it. Is my honest opinion.
I just figured 5 gallons of Mexican water isn't cheap to UPS up here to Ohio. So, that's probably part of the problem too, right? You got to have Mexican water to make Mexican beer.
Well, just even today, I seen the new, well, you can talk into water chemistry. I mean, you can really, when you start talking water chemistry, I mean, you can really get into the nuts and bolts. You technically could, don't get me wrong.
Create Mexican water.
Yeah.
Right. Once my dog drinks half of his bowl, I dump the other half in a jug and collect that. And eventually I'll have enough Mexican water. It's about the same. My dog's a Chihuahua, so it's about the same.
You have a Chihuahua?
No, but how else would you get Mexican beer? I'm just saying. So Corona, now I have made one of the, I brewed with the cheap extract kits, and there was a kit that was a Mexican,
Cerveza, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, it wasn't bad, you drop a few limes in it tastes fine.
But however, if you was to compare
but
that
it wasn't
to
Corona.
Correct.
Right.
I'm saying, I would say more I don't get the question Corona. I actually get, I'm a bud drinker, and I want to be able to make bud. And I tell people, Anheuser-Busch are the kingpins of making something that doesn't taste like anything.
Right.
You're going to have a hard, they've got multi-million-dollar of equipment doing that. It's amazing with beer. The crappier the beer takes, the more equipment, because, I don't want to say crappy. I said that wrong. The most consistent, watery, lightly flavored beer really takes some specialized equipment. And not to mention, I'm sorry, I am a firm believer, because I seen someone drinking Corona Premier. That's like a thing now.
Oh, I didn't even heard of that.
Corona that competes with the Michelob Ultra. It's like a low alcohol, low carb.
Oh,
I gotcha.
It's like 80 carbs or 80 calories, 2 carbs or something like that. Like
3%
alcohol.
The point
maybe I can do that since I'm not drinking beer.
I'm telling you, it's Chihuahua water.
That I'm telling you, I guess to answer the question, I'm convinced where if I was to go, sure, you can brew a beer, it tastes exactly like Budweiser. Here, you can try one of my home brews. Let me go get it out of the back. And if I poured a Budweiser in the glass and brought it out front for someone to try, they'd go, no, that doesn't taste like Budweiser. And I could pour it straight from the Budweiser. I think there is some placebo effect going into it. Sure. So, I don't mean that in a disrespectful way. I truly believe that when you look at the bottle, the label, there's something triggering in your head that says, that's the way it's got to be. Back to Chris's can art. I mean, if the can art ain't on point, I mean,
don't even bother.
The beer's going to be terrible.
Don't even bother.
But it is back to, I mean, based on what we're just saying, I did it backwards, meaning, I would not, like this Happy Amber, I would have never, it's not a bad beer. It's not the best. It's not a bad beer. I like it, but before I brewed beer, I would not have, I wouldn't drink. Meaning I drank Budweiser, technically not. I was a Miller guy. So I drank Miller Lite.
Same thing.
Then I started brewing beer. And from there, I went to this has more flavor. And from there, I went to drinking more flavored beers. So, I mean, is that, now that I think about it, is that more the norm, or is it somebody going, hey, I drink a bunch of crazy craft beers, I want to make one of those? I really did it backwards. I did it backwards then. I
think that's totally where it's at today.
We
were talking about this last week, weren't we, Johnny?
Yeah. I was the same as you, Mark. I did it backwards in comparison to today. I got into craft beer because of home brewing. Most people now get into home brewing because of craft beer. Right. See, I mean, as a general, don't get me wrong, we still get a lot of people, I would say, even was similar to me, of just, hey, I want to make something, I want to ferment something and make alcohol.
Okay. So based on this question, then let's do this again. If someone says, hey, I don't drink craft beer, I only drink Budweiser or Corona, but I do think I want to get into brewing beer, would you suggest a couple basic kits, or would you really suggest, go buy a Happy Amber, or go buy a few craft beers and see if you like drinking those?
I tell people, it's actually kind of funny because there was someone who bought, we sell a complete homebrew setup. That's everything, including bottles and everything. And what comes with it is the American Amber. And when people come and say, oh, can I sub the American Amber for, the American Light or some of the other kits I have, I say you can. However, if it's your first homebrew, I definitely recommend you go with the American Amber. It's the most popular kit. And to brew those really light styles of beers, I don't want you to get disgruntled with home brewing, because like even this lager that you had, Mark, that I brewed, I've been brewing for close to 10 years. This is the first one I ain't screwed up completely. I mean, I've brewed probably 5 lagers and they've all been just disasters. I mean, it is a tough beer style. It's amazing to make a very light, crisp style of beer. It's tough. I mean, it really is tough to brew, and it really takes a lot of know-how. And you start getting into yeast starters. I'm working on that video, Chris. You start talking on yeast starters and all kind. I mean, it really, when you start brewing lagers, you really got to know a lot about brewing. I mean, fermentation control. I mean, there's just a lot that comes with it. So, I tell people a lot, if you're going to be upset if you don't have Budweiser that tastes exactly like it, unfortunately, I don't feel home brewing is for you right now. But however, if you want to keep an open mind and just understand, hey, I'm making some alcohol or whatever, maybe pick up a cider kit, pick up something where you're not just upset because you didn't make Budweiser. Pick up something that makes you your taste buds are outside of the normal box.
Right. Okay.
And I'm surprised a lot of the people come in wanting to make Budweiser. They start off with ciders because, hey, I like a good cider. I couldn't really tell you the name of a certain brand that I'm, hooked on, but I like a cider from time to time. And those are the ones I actually say ciders are super simple to make. You should start off with a cider. And that's kind of the direction I usually lean people towards.
Well, that'll roll us right into the next question, which is we get asked pretty regularly, and that's how difficult is it to get started brewing? I mean, I know we've gone into basics and stuff like that, but and like I said, I go all the way back to where I did nothing more than heat up a can, throw it in a gallon of boiling water, dump that into a bucket with, 3 more gallons of cold water and maybe a gallon of ice, and that was it. I mean, I started probably about as easy as you can. Actually, I mean, I actually started with the Mr. Beer kit. Maybe that's the easiest way. Yeah. But how hard is it to get started in brewing? Chris, we'll go with you since you don't sell any kits or anything. How hard was it for you to get started?
It wasn't that hard at all. I mean, I think the true answer, I guess my answer to that would be, it depends on what you want to do. If you're really just trying to learn and you just want to get your feet wet, sure, one of the Mr. Beer kits, because that's what I started with too. And that you come in with the understanding that you're most likely going to, you're going to mess up. You're going to make some mistakes, but you're going to learn and improve along the way. Then how much is a Mr. Beer kit? $40, $50?
Mine was a gift. Actually, I think mine was a gift when they were more expensive. I actually think my family might have paid $100 and got like 3, I think it made 2 gallons of beer. Sure.
Yeah.
I think my Mr. Beer kit was like, you ever seen the movie Old School?
Yeah.
Where he goes, here, I got you a bread maker. He goes, no, actually, I bought you a bread maker. I bought you this bread maker.
Yeah. You mean it was a re-gift?
I think my first beer kit was you re-gifted it to me, Mark. I'm pretty sure you gave me your plastic bottles and that little root beer looking thingamabobber.
Yeah.
I could be wrong if I remember correctly.
You might have got my Mr. Beer kit at some point.
Yeah. Like
I thought I remember seeing that.
You old schooled me. Yeah. I had one.
Hey, and you know what? You got to give them credit. There was a time there where, and again, I don't watch Home Network or Home Shopping, or I don't even remember now what the other one was, but there used to be a time where you'd turn that on and, they'd be selling Mr. Beer kits. I mean, you could go into in our area, we have Elder Beermans and stores like that, and you could buy a Mr. Beer kit in those things. I mean,
I didn't know that. Wow.
Yes. I don't carry Mr. Beer kits. However, I love Mr. Beer because Mr. Beer is usually the entryway for a lot of people. Nowadays, with the popularity of breweries and people going to breweries and seeing the process, I'm surprised at how many people just jump straight into all grain, just go past extract because they're seeing it. Like back to kind of what we talked about. Mr. Beer used to be, hey, I'm a Bud drinker. Hey, I can make my own beer. Cool. I bought this lager kit. It's going to be like Bud. Versus now people are more like, I know I don't even want a lager. I can't, so I'm not even going to buy a Mr. Beer kit because I don't want the lager. I've seen what a brewery does. That's what I want to do. I'm shocked how many people like have aspirations of going to competitions or having a brewery or just flat out want to make something like, what they're drinking at their local.
But to answer the question, how difficult is it to get started? It isn't difficult. I mean, really,
it's not.
And we could argue the actual cost, but $100 in a couple hours, and you can ruin your first batch.
You can get started for even cheaper than that if you're just worried about cost. And like I said, a cider, if you can make Kool-Aid, you can make cider. Sorry, I mean it's that simple. I mean,
same thing with mead.
Yeah. I mean, it's exactly. Thank you, Chris. I mean, most people, I have surprisingly customers. They just they get a 1 gallon glass jug, and they go to the store, get some honey. They get a 1 gallon glass jug, a stopper, an airlock, and a 60-cent pack of yeast, and they're off to the races.
Well, that'll actually move us right into the next two because we're kind of already there, and I'm going to put these two together because again, they're the most popular questions, and that's how much will it cost, and how long does it take before I can drink my first beer?
2 weeks.
We were already talking cost, so we already know. Again, I started for less than $50. And I shouldn't say again, the Mr. Beer kit was years before I eventually first brewed. Like I said, I've told the story. I started with a 5 gallon jug from the Aqua Water company here in town.
Oh, wow.
I did not even buy a bucket. I did it all right inside that. I bought the rubber stopper and did everything right in the one jug. And again, I drank the whole 5 gallons. I'm not sure wasn't great beer I made, but I did make beer and I drank it. So, and I'd agree 2 weeks is pretty much the commitment. I learned over time though, it always tastes better if I let it go longer. It was harder, but especially that first batch, I think most people struggle with that second week. But you're right. You can do it in 2 weeks, but I learned pretty quickly if you let that go a little, that extra week can make a big difference flavor wise, even with a basic beer kit.
I tell people general rule of thumb is when it comes to how much does it cost, that's really dependent on just honestly your budget, because I can get you started for, next to nothing in all honesty. What time-wise, I tell people 2 weeks, but if you're patient, it does get better if you're a little bit more patient with it. But minimum in 2 weeks, you're gonna drink what is a fizzy beer. It's gonna be cloudy, and it's gonna be this, and it's gonna be that, and it's not gonna be perfect. But 2 weeks, you're drinking beer.
Yeah. Yep, wholeheartedly agree. And I think the only benefit, like you were saying before, Mark, is from waiting. Some stuff might, whatever you might have added to the beer, flavors might mellow out. Or if you're waiting on especially with the Mr. Beer kit, remember the little pellets, the carbonation,
drops,
tablets. Yeah,
we sell a similar product.
If you want to wait for those to kind of settle out, sure, you can do that. But yeah, 2 weeks.
But I will say, no offense to Mr. Beer, because like I said, if it weren't for Mr. Beer, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair right now. But time doesn't help that beer.
No, it doesn't. It's gonna be bad. I mean, it's going to be bad.
No, I tell people say that. We say that, but it was drinkable. I mean, if you drank a lot of it.
I drank it. I'm not saying it's not drinkable. I mean, I'm just saying it's not. It's not going to be great.
It goes back to the conversation we had earlier. If you come into the shop and say, "Hey, I want something that tastes like craft beer. Here, get me one of these pre-hopped kits because it's going to," and I just mix a pre-hopped kit with 3 pounds of corn sugar, top it off with water, and sprinkle this silver foil yeast on the top of it, and it's going to taste just like the craft brewery I was at last night. I'm going to say, no, you're going to be disappointed. Mm-hmm. Just like the Budweiser conversation, I mean, to brew good quality. I'm saying it wrong. To brew beer like you're drinking at the local breweries is going to require you adding your own hop additions, adding your own specialty grains, pitching specified yeast, fermenting at the right temperatures. Exactly. I mean, versus just pouring a can of pre-hopped extract in there. Will that make good beer? Yes. I mean, but it's not going to make, I'm sorry, it's not going to be as good as the local breweries around here. It's just
right. Because that's what I did, but I still believed what I was making that way still had better and more flavor than Budweiser.
Well, it goes back
to some extent.
That was my debate is I was making, 50-cent 12-ounce beer that, still tasted better than the $1 Budweiser beer that I was drinking before I made my own.
Sure. I mean, I agree to disagree in the sense of, yes, it's more flavorful. Back to we talked about, we kind of threw Budweiser under the bus of being flavorless. So yes, it's absolutely going to be flavorful. Are they flavors you necessarily want? I don't know.
Well, but you wouldn't know because it's me. I mean, it's no different to me than box cake. I can make a box cake, and to me, that still will taste better than a cake I bought at a box store. I'm sorry. When I get a birthday cake from a local grocery store, it still doesn't taste the same as just a crappy box cake I make at home tastes better versus I've known people to take a box cake and add a few other ingredients and a good homemade icing on top of it. It tastes really good. And then there's a cake from scratch. They all can be pretty damn good cake if you add some ice cream to them.
I guess here's a better scenario. It's like Krispy Kreme donuts. You can get Krispy Kreme donuts at the grocery store, but when you get them hot off that damn thing,
straight from the store,
melt in your mouth, those ones at Kroger suck.
Yeah,
so it's coming from the same place when they're hot, fresh, and So I guess to answer your question, from scratch cookies versus ones that came from a box or a log that you get at the grocery store that just came out of the damn oven. I'm choosing
right. Yeah.
But no, okay, but that's the point though. What you're choosing is one thing, but it doesn't mean that the other thing still isn't better. I'm sorry. The thing you buy, we'll go back to the cookie thing. There's the box cookies, which I'll say the Chip Ahoy, but then there is the next step, which is that dough you buy in the refrigerator section that you just cut up.
Oh yeah,
that still tastes better than a Chips Ahoy.
Yeah,
but it's still not the same as some mom making homemade chocolate chip cookie.
Those got love in them though, Mark. I mean, that's the extra ingredient that you can't buy. I mean, come on now.
The beer when I would make the beer from the can
in my house when they're made with love, that means shit. I forgot about the cookies. They're burnt as hell.
Right.
The smoke detector's they're done buzzer.
Right.
I got you. My point is, if someone came to me and said, if I just want to try one of these canned things, whatever, I would tell someone I would still try that versus, not doing it at all.
I think me and Chris discussed this. Whatever gets you started is what's best for you. Period.
Sure.
Back to if I looked at the way I started brewing when I first started brewing, I can't even force myself to do it now. But at the same point in time, it's what got me started. So if it gets you what started and you build your, Coach Smart, if it builds your confidence, that's what's best for you. I mean, it's.
But the difference where you're going that I'm not is that doesn't mean that someone can't start there and stay there and be fine there.
I agree. I do agree with that.
I
100% agree with that.
That's what I'm saying. And I get it. It's like it's everyone who's. I mean, it's even back to poker. There's the people say, "Well, I just play for fun. I have fun, and every time I get an ace, I'm going to keep playing, and I'm going to always play." And that's fine. And as long as you're happy playing that way, that's great. And I've learned as a better player and or someone who has paid more attention, that my way in my mind is better. But it's really not in their mind. If that's the way they want to play, that's fine. Meaning, it's easy for us to say this is the better way because it's the way I do it, and it's more ingredients, it's this, and it has more flavor. But if you're happy with a can and boiling water, then
then do that.
Have at it.
Yeah,
I would say there's a YouTuber called Craig Tube. Fantastic. If anyone gets a chance, watch Craig Tube. And he does the pre-hopped extract kits. He's been doing them before me. He did them for years before me. He still does them now, and he always defends them. and because he's a home brewer and he feels the people who are all grain and extracting and all of that, talk down to him or whatever. He's in Canada. He's doing it to save money, and I get it. But at the same point in time, I find him super entertaining, super nice guy. And, he is home brewing, and it doesn't mean that, like, when I say what I say, it doesn't mean I'm trying to be pompous or talk above him or like
my problem is you don't have to try sometimes. Some people don't have to try to be pompous. It just happens. Pompous. My point is
pompous.
My point. The point I'm trying to make is, I still to this day watch all the content he puts out on YouTube because I find him entertaining. I like what's going on with him. You feel like a connection with him. And he's still doing the pre-hopped kits. I'm not saying I'm better than him and I'm making better beer than him because he's perfectly content with what he has. And he's not entering him in some competition. He's happy with what he's got. Then stick with it. I mean, the fact that he's
I'm sorry, you can take those cans and still make a 5 or 6% alcohol. And if I drink 3 or 4 of those and sit in my chair, I'm going to get buzzed just like you would on better beer.
Which I would say this would be a good segue. I know one of the questions has to do with my grandpappy's wine.
That's the next one.
So let's go there.
Oh boy, what is this about?
You might be jumping around, but this would be a good segue.
My grandpa used to make the worst tasting wine ever. Will mine be that bad? So
yes,
people are comparing what their grandpa made in the bathtub to a real wine kit or a real, and again, I think that goes back to the same thing. Grandpa might have been making wine so he didn't have to listen to grandma wine as much. Or to deal with
care about how it tasted.
Wine.
He just wanted it to get him
drunk. And that is the case. I mean, I still know people to this day that will buy, the 12% alcohol, drinks, beer, whatever they call them. Or
hey, I'll buy a King Cobra on a good day.
Right. There are just times where you need a little bit of sleeping aid. So that would be it. So go ahead and answer the question. Is the wine kits of today comparable to what Grandpa was trying to make in the bathtub?
Absolutely not. And I'm going to say 2 reasons, but it's probably going to turn into 5. But reason number 1 is because the wine concentrate Grandpa used to use came from Welch's. I won't bash that because you make a really good wine with that.
I know.
But the second step is the knowledge and overall just technology that we have today. So, Grandpa, Grandma, Aunt, they are making a recipe. I'm still beating myself up for not making dandelion wine this year. They're following recipes. They were working with what they had. A lot of times they were using bread yeasts, things like that. So I said 2. So number 3 is the technology. Now we're making specified wine yeast. We sell wine kits that are specifically for a certain variety of wine. So just overall, the technology, the quality of ingredients are much more improved. Back to a simple airlock, fermenters. Grandpa was making it and gosh knows what with gosh knows what. So absolutely, if all you have to remember, if you associate homebrewing with Grandpa's wine, or I'm not trying to throw Grandpa under the bus, give homebrewing a shot. You will. My wife thinks that she loves sweet wine, so I make a lot of Moscato.
That was a hit at the party too.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where she point blank, it's where she was sold into me home brewing. She said, this is better than anything you've ever brought home from the store. Back to, I could very easily go to the store and spend however much for a bottle of wine, but she actually prefers what I brew over that. And she's not doing it to toot my horn. Right. I mean, she genuinely thinks it's better. So to answer the question, if don't let that distract you from getting started.
Now, we've had a couple of people ask that question, so I don't obviously know how old their grandfather is. My grandfather would have been old enough to have gone through Prohibition and all that, and probably did learn how to make, they just did it truly for buzz.
They were making moonshine.
Well, right, which is back to, and that's exactly where I was going. I mean, I've had moonshine, I've had white lightning, whatever you want to call it, and that stuff tastes like shit. But it's not made to I mean, the taste isn't what you're
You
drinking.
don't drink that straight.
Well,
Right.
I believe,
Well, but you're drinking it for the feeling it's going to give you later, not necessarily for the taste you're getting at the time.
But I believe because of prohibition, and correct me if I'm wrong, that's the reason why mixed drinks are so popular these days. They had to find a way to make that shit swallowable, because the bathtub gin and everything they were making was just rough. So modern day mixed drinks they had to make cocktails. I think that's the word I was looking for. They had to make cocktails because to just drink that stuff straight was just disgusting. So, we kind of have to thank our grandparents. If it wouldn't have been for them, we wouldn't have
but
the
it even
cocktails
goes back farther than that. I mean, some of the original alcohols, were done to, like we've said in the past, to preserve crops and all that, but also they were medicines before they were, before they were beverages. So it's just a matter of what you're making and why you're making it and all that.
But in summary, to answer the question, please don't let that keep you from brewing.
Right.
You'll do a much better job.
Yeah.
Well, it's just because ingredients in general,
and just overall knowledge.
Better.
Grandpa was relying off a recipe that was handed down to him or her.
Right.
And
Grandpa probably didn't Google it.
Yeah. Now we Google. Yeah. We, like I said, I'm brewing beer as good as I am today because of Craig Tube. And we got to thank him for that,
Right. All right. Next question. Probably more of again, this can happen to anybody. I've had it. My beer is not bubbling. What do I do now, or what went wrong?
This might be, I don't know all the questions, but this is my favorite one. Don't do nothing. It's probably fermenting.
Right. I was talking about that's the first thing. Like airlock activity.
Yeah, people say my airlock. People call me all the time and say, "Joey, I listen to you. My beer's not bubbling. It's not fermenting." And I tell them 9 times out of 10, it is fermenting. You just did something wrong. Air is leaking out somewhere. Right. They're ready to pitch more yeast, do this, do that. And I say, it's fermenting, probably. You just don't know it is. Don't worry about it. Just relax. Wait 24 hours. They call me 24 hours and say, it's still not doing nothing. I'm coming to the store. I'm buying some yeast. And I say, okay, when you open up the top, if there's foam all over the top, it's fermenting. And they'll call me the next day or next time they come to the store, they'll go, how did you know that? And I say, it's really tough to not have ferment. I mean, if you listen to a handful of tips I give you and just follow basic instructions, it's really tough nowadays. Back to, kind of what we were talking about before with the specialized yeast and everything. It's tough. You got to try hard to not have it ferment.
Right. I've had a couple of instances where I've had a busted grommet like next to on my airlock, and I wasn't getting any fermentation activity. Pop the top on that thing, and krausen everywhere. Oh yeah.
Now that being said, you can. Again, in the past, you can kill the yeast with temperature or heat before you pitch it. That type thing, which obviously. But even then, the odds are you didn't kill it all, and it might just take a little longer to ferment than
most of the time. Most of the time, if people kill the yeast, it's because they add it when it's too hot,
right?
Because they read the books and say it's going to get infected, so they think they have to throw the yeast in. I've told people if you don't hit your numbers, I'm talking temperature wise, just throw the lid on it, put the airlock on it, wait till tomorrow. Make sure it hits the temperature before you add the yeast, because a lot of people panic because they think if they don't add the yeast immediately that it could get infected. It's not that likely.
I pitched yeast a week later and the beer still turned out okay. It was drinkable.
Yeah, you let one sit
not sure what happened.
Year,
what's that?
You let a beer sit in your basement for like a year?
It actually technically sat in my parents' basement with no water in the airlock. Still got drink. So
right. If it works, it works.
Yep.
All right. Next question, which really kind of goes with the same thing. Can they ferment in a garage? And I think normally that question to me is more, do I have to have a special area to do, my fermenting? And to me, like I said, unless you're lagering or something where you need temperature control, you can pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, you can ferment anywhere.
You can, I guess it just depends, especially in Ohio. The only thing that I recommend to other folks is that if you're going to place it in a room, put it on an inside wall less chance of it like, you know, getting hit like with any of the cold if it happens to be anywhere from like, you know, November to, well, hell, end of April this year since we had such cold weather. But other than that, yeah, you can put it in pretty much any area of your house and still should expect a decent amount of fermentation activity.
Because I live in a house that doesn't have central air, you know, so I just, you know, I mean, certain times of the year I would put it in different places, and then in the summer I would put it in the room where we had, you know, a window air conditioner, so the temperature was a little more controlled. Never had a problem. I've never had one blow up. I've never had, you know, foam on the ceiling or anything like that.
Done that.
So, knock on wood, I've never had that. So obviously, if you're concerned about that or you're experimenting, then obviously I would maybe say, well, maybe if, you know, maybe the garage or basement somewhere where it's easier to clean is up to you. But,
well,
you know.
I think the question actually kind of stirs a little bit from the, you know, brewing question. Does it smell when I brew? And the answer is yes. I mean, it does. So a lot
delicious.
So it does, but a lot of significant others don't like the smell of it if they're not into beer. So to answer the question, a lot of us have to brew in the garage just because of the smell. So we think, oh, can we ferment in the garage? And I always tell people, please do not do that unless your garage is temperature controlled like the rest of your house. Beer does not like fluctuating temperatures. So even if it's on the cool end of the spectrum or on the hot end of the spectrum, try to have it in a place where it's fairly consistent. At the same point in time, back to a garage, if it's middle of winter, if your garage is 40-something degrees, don't brew an ale out there. And garages are going to, you know, fluctuate in temperature. So
that would
try to find a place, like I think Chris said, you know, an inside wall. Try to find a place it's not going to fluctuate in temperature a bunch.
Dark
for
spot,
years,
closet.
I had a bathroom in my basement in my old house, back to blowing off. Did that a few times. I used to just throw it in the bathroom stall of my old house, and that was my fermentation room because I knew it didn't change much in temperature no matter what time of year it was.
Well, I have a closet, an open closet in our. Me and Mrs. Easy ended up in a back bedroom when the kids all took over the upstairs, and there's a walk-in kind of pantry there, and I would put it in there. And I remember the first time I did it, nothing was said. And then in the middle of the night, you could hear it going bloop, bloop, bloop. And she would look at me and she finally like, what is that? And I said, well, I got the beer. I put it in there. It just started fermenting. And sometimes it would take a day or two before you wouldn't pay attention or know anything. And all of a sudden you just hear that thing go bloop, you know, and you could, I
love it.
You could set a watch by it. You know, if you have it going just right, literally for hours, you could time how many seconds till that next bloop would happen.
Mm-hmm.
I told Chris the other day when me and him were chatting that I have wood floors in my house. I think over the years they've sanded them and refinished them or whatever, and they've become thinner over the years. So when it's even in my basement, I'll be sleeping in bed and go bloop.
Yeah, you can hear it.
Like, what is that?
You can hear it in my basement.
That's the sound of love, hun. So shut up so I can listen.
Oh yeah, man. That's science right there. What are you talking about?
Right. Mrs. Easy isn't as easy as that beer's going to be. So just let it go. Let it work.
Oh, yeah.
Let it be.
Let it be. Yeast, liquid or dry? Pretty popular question.
Oh, Joey and I just talked about this on Sunday, and I guess there are two schools of thought with that, at least in my personal opinion. I prefer liquid. That's just for me personally. But that's mostly just for the style of beers that I brew. Dry yeast, you can purchase it, but I would think that most folks purchase dry yeast just because, generally speaking, you're only paying like $1 for a dry yeast packet, whereas for a liquid yeast packet, you're spending probably anywhere from $5 to $7 for a liquid yeast packet. So, I mean, there's kind of like the pros and cons of of both of them. But
I've never done liquid. Is there a big price difference?
There is.
Yeah, it's like $1 for, I'd say on average $1 for a dry yeast packet. On average, let's say $5 to $6 for a liquid yeast packet, somewhere in there.
Same variety. I mean, meaning can you get the exact same yeast in a dry versus a liquid yeast? I mean, the exact same result. I don't even know if that's the right question, but you know what I'm saying? Is it the same? What? I mean, I don't even know. A person who sells yeast, can they sell the same? I don't even know. Strand. I don't even know now what you call.
Oh yes, you'll get the same. Yeah.
So so if we want to talk dry yeast, USO5 is the most popular dry yeast. A equivalent to that is White Labs WLP001, and then you have Y Yeast 1056. Those are all the Chico strand, which I believe derives from Sierra Nevada Brewery.
Mm-hmm.
So those are 3 options: 1 dry, 2 liquid, that essentially do exactly the same thing. Then you've got USO4, which is English ale, and then so there are some that transcend to different beer strains. There are certain ones I tell people, general rule of thumb: if you're new to brewing, use dry. It's reliable, good cell count. You got to mess with starters, none of that. If you are brewing something like a wheat beer, a Belgian beer, certain ones where the flavor is being derived from the yeast, then go with a liquid. So the general rule of thumb is, if the hops and the malt are shining, just use dry. If you're doing something like a saison or something where the yeast is really shining through, then go with a liquid. It's tough through whatever process they make it dry for those characteristics to come out in the dry.
Yeah, I think with the Hefeweizens and I think a couple others, they generally prefer a liquid yeast for that.
Yep. And I would agree. I totally agree. Because it's tough to get that banana clovey flavor from a dry yeast.
Exactly.
All right. Now, here's my question, because I've always used the packets of yeast, which obviously I know is dry, but I've pitched it 2 different ways. I've pitched it where I'm like, who cares? I just cut it open and pour it on top of my bucket, put the lid on. But then I've also poured it in a little thing of water and let it sit for a little bit and bubble up. And that technically, the science in my head is a yeast form is a yeast form, liquid or dry. It's just, one has had water or liquid added to it. Isn't that the case? I mean, meaning if I take a dry liquid and put it in water and let it sit there for a month, it technically is still the same yeast. It just now has been, it's
so
water added to it.
I believe in bread making, they call it proofing.
Correct.
And in beer making, we call it rehydrating, which is probably a more appropriate term. I don't recommend people to rehydrate their yeast, because it will be perfectly fine if you sprinkle it right on top of the wort. Because I've ruined more yeast rehydrating it, because the directions will say get water to 90 degrees. And next thing you know, you stick a thermometer, it's hot in different spots, and you zapped your whole damn packet of yeast by accident. The idea behind rehydrating it in beer terms is you're not putting it straight to work. So when you pitch it into your yeast, you're throwing it right on top of sugars. So it kind of puts them under stress. Versus when you're rehydrating it, you're just adding water. So you're not putting them under stress. You're letting them, kind of wake up and get happy before you add it there. I will honestly say that in my experience, rehydrating is kind of a waste of time. I don't recommend it.
I wouldn't recommend it.
But back to what I always say is, if it makes you feel better and you want to follow the directions of the yeast packet, do it. Doesn't hurt anything. Doesn't hurt anything. Go for it.
Make a yeast starter. Video available soon.
Yep.
Coming to a cinnamon near you.
Hell yeah. With yours truly.
Yours truly. All right. That's good. We're getting towards the end here. Another question is, I have a buddy that used to brew 20 years ago. The stuff's in the attic. I bought it from him. Can I just start brewing in that, or do I need to buy new stuff?
I would say check and see the cleanliness of the equipment that he has. And I would say that if it's been 20 years, if there's any, let's say, like metallic parts to it, either replace, toss out, that sort of thing. But if it's just,
I would say that too. Hoses, yeah. I'd be careful of hoses that might have.
You can replace those
that's
for
pretty cheap.
Anyway.
Buckets, those aren't that cheap. to me, which a guy did give me, I've got a couple glass carboids, and obviously those are going to be good.
No, those will last you forever.
The rubber bungs or boings or plugs, whatever the hell you want to call the damn things, those, I find if they're real old, they're probably brittle and all that, and that's not expensive either. But, like we've said, brewing's not that expensive, and the stuff that you would think's expensive probably isn't. Back to a couple buckets is cheap. But glass carboids and some things like that. Actually, now I think about it, what is the one most expensive piece that most people start brewing would invest in? Is it the buckets or a fermenter or a glass carboid? I don't even think the average beginner would need a glass carboid, but
most likely your brew pot.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is the brew pot? I mean, since most folks, I think some folks go with stainless, since that's fairly cheaper. Right. If you go with the full on, if you go with the aluminum brew pots, those will run you a little bit more. So that, I think that might be the more expensive piece, either that or maybe your wort chiller. Depending on if you want to spring for that, you can build your own. I built mine for $30. Used garden hose, copper tubing, and whatnot. So if you have
the best wort chiller is a 2-foot thing of snow on your deck.
There's
nothing. Just take that pot and set it right into that snow. That's the best wort chiller
because every time I've ever tried that method, next thing you know, I'm up to 2:00 in the morning going, why won't this cool down?
That's a lot of mass to be trying to cool down.
Whatever.
Absolutely. But that's the only other more expensive piece that I can think of to a home setup.
So usually used equipment, you're not saving as much as you'd think because it's not that expensive to start brewing.
Exactly.
The ingredients for your first brew are going to probably be the most expensive part.
It could be.
It's subjective. It's kind of funny because today a guy came in the store, a customer comes in all the time. He goes, "Man, I swear I started brewing to save money." And because he was on Craigslist and he was on this and he's bought, this used equipment here, some used equipment there, and a conical fermenter and this and that, and a stainless steel this and stainless steel that. He's like, I swear I started brewing to save money. And I don't think to this date I've saved a penny. And so, it is funny, if you want to brew beer for cheap, you absolutely can. But when you get a hold of the hobby bug, I'm not, you can go crazy with it.
I think that's any long-term thing,
of course. You do have to invest in the future. I'm kind of going through the same thing. I've been using plastic buckets and glass carboys for years. There's nothing wrong with them. My glass ones been doing me great, but I want to invest in a good stainless steel conical fermenter because I know I'm going to use it for the rest of my life. And I know I'm going to brew for the rest of my life, but they're expensive. So it's subjective. If you're going to brew for a year or two, it's an expensive hobby to get into. If you're going to be brewing for the rest of your life, your money's well spent. You're going to use it forever.
Yeah.
Well,
but you can brew cheaply. And that's the thing. I think we've discussed this time and time and time again. You can brew. The person who's spending all the money on all the top of the line equipment versus the guy who's doing it for very, very cheap. They're producing very, very similar beers. I don't think there's really a difference. The person who's got the best brewing knowledge is going to brew the better beer over the guy who's got all the toys.
Agreed.
I agree. I married Mrs. Easy because I thought long term that was going to be cheaper. Nah, that didn't work either. You know what? If it's going to be a long-term hobby, you're going to spend some money.
Yeah.
So, just you got to put up with it. Consistency. Last question. You know what? I make a beer I like. What's the odds I'll be able to do it again? How hard is it to be consistent in the home brewing market?
I would say consistency is really a measure of how much data that you have on that particular recipe. So you can have the same recipe and say that I'm going to measure out, I'm going to have 10 pounds of 2-row, 2 pounds of, adjuncts, and then this many hops or whatever. But how much other information do you have? Do you know exactly what temperature that you mashed at? Do you know exactly how much water that you use in order to do the batch?
Record keeping.
Exactly. Bookkeeping is a huge part of home brewing.
I would never be consistent then.
I would say that would really help you out when it comes to making sure that your consistency wins out like over time. I mean, you'll be in the ballpark. Don't get me wrong.
Sure.
I mean, you're not gonna be like, so far off in left field that you're not gonna even recognize the beer that you have. But if you're looking for something that, if you brewed a beer that's supposed to be, 6.5% ABV, and you're trying to hit that every single time, then yeah, the more information that you have about that recipe and the things that you did in order to create it, so much the better. So you can hit those targets every single time that you brew.
Then the last question for both of you, based on this exact topic, is: have either one of you made the same recipe more than twice?
Yes.
Yeah, Joey. I have, yes.
I have a recipe that I brew almost every other batch I brew. Just because when I say same recipe, I don't mean like I do everything identical. I change just very, very small things from it so I can test certain things. I might use a different yeast strain. I might use I don't even want to say different hop, different mash temperatures. It's my control batch, meaning I know what this beer tastes like. I know what this beer should taste like. So if I try different things, it gives me a baseline to find out the variances of my new principles. It's kind of funny, that same recipe, which is, you probably see me drinking on cast a zillion times. It's a session IPA I brew time and time again. Simcoe Amarillo hops. The best I've ever made that recipe, ever, in my eyes, is using the cheapest pack of yeast the store has to offer.
There you go.
So the question is, do you have to spend $10 for Imperial yeast? Maybe. But on that particular batch, I used good old Mutton's $1.15, yeast, dumped it in there. I remember thinking, going, oh my gosh, this is so good. What did I do this batch that made this so good? And I went, holy shit, I used the cheapest yeast strain in the store. So it just goes to show you, if your brewing procedure is good, you're going to make good beer. You don't have to, you can't buy your way to victory with it. It really takes you brewing.
Chris, I think I heard you say you have brewed the same beer more than once.
Yeah, it's a pumpkin ale. So that was the one that the very first time that I did it was actually over at Joey's old house, where I literally cut up a pumpkin.
I remember that.
Yeah, took the pumpkin meat, tossed it in the oven for I think like an hour or so, put like brown sugar and all that.
What pumpkin doesn't love his meat in the oven?
Hell yeah. And then put the meat and stuff in the boil. And that's when I was still doing extract brewing. But now, since I've converted over to all grain, I've tweaked the recipe, just converted over to all grain, but still the same thing. And just tweaking it, here and there, adjusting how much pumpkin meat, adjusting how many spices I use. I mean, I know it's kind of cliche because everybody does like pumpkin beers, around like, October, November, but it's still one of those ones where it was the very first recipe that I did where it was like, holy shit, I really like brewing. Yeah. Like, this is kind of wild to be putting, actual like, fruit or like pumpkin, doing the pumpkin meat, like putting that into your boil and to create a pumpkin flavor. And I actually hit that. And, so I've been doing it ever since. And I think it's a fun thing to do.
All right. I've heard the word pumpkin meat enough now.
I did a pumpkin beer that same day, and I did my pumpkin beer with pumpkin from a can. And my pumpkin beer tastes like shit, and Chris's was amazing. So just
all right. I make a mean pumpkin squash soup where I smoke both. Oh, it's delicious.
Oh, that sounds delicious.
It is good. I smoke it in the thing, and I smoke chicken at the same time. Then I make my own chicken broth. Then I use that with the pumpkin and pumpkin and the squash. But now here's the key. From a can. But I make
brew beer from a can.
But I make two different types. I make a sweet one where I use like a pumpkin pie spices and maple syrup. So it's actually a sweet soup. And then I take the exact same ingredients and make it a spice soup where I use more of peppers and flake peppers, stuff like that, where it's more of a pumpkin spice, where it's so I've got the same batch of pumpkin and squash, but then one's a sweet soup. Well, it's delicious. All right. Chris, thank you for coming this evening, and I'm glad you did not enjoy any beer tonight and no fancy cans.
Three more weeks, and I can drink some beer. 3 more weeks, fellas.
Real quick. Where can we find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX.
And have you got to work back in the store again lately? I mean, can
not
people,
yet. I mean,
people once every year come in and find you, and
I mean, whenever. I mean, if Joey ever needs us again, I mean, I'm sure you guys will find me behind the counter. But until then, you might see me in a video here.
All right.
Shortly.
Maybe we'll get some signed photographs that Joey could pass out the store for people.
Hell yeah, I'll do autograph.
Sign picture. Joey, where can people find you? Give me a little information about the store.
They can find me at HBYOB, the store, and all the links are in the description.
At HBYOB.com. We were live on YouTube. We never mentioned that anymore, but we have fun. This is Easy Kill. You can find me on A Fantasy Sportscast. Here talking beer. Next week we're going to be talking, gardening. We're going to be talking about growing hops. Something. I'm kind of curious. I'm kind of a tomato guy, but maybe hops should be my new growing career. So join us next Tuesday night, same time here on YouTube, Spreaker.com. You can find us. I've had fun tonight. We've done a lot. I enjoyed my my amber. Again, this is on my high end of flavor, meaning it's a late night, drink one can, go to bed. It wasn't a bad beer. I'd recommend it. I've had a good time. Thanks for coming out tonight. We'll catch y'all next week. And you know what? Enjoy brewing. The weather's changed, so take a long weekend and brew. So until next week, say goodnight.